Neurobiological advances from the brain disease model of addiction. Definition: it's important to understand that everyone in the world has addictions, or rather natural addictions, for the things that are good like water, food, and sleep. These natural addictions are good to survival. Our body creates the addictions whenever the brain recognizes something is good and releases dopamine. Dopamine makes you feel pleasure. The brain releases dopamine to let your body know that it's good, so it increases the hierarchy of survival. Substances like alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs have special chemical characteristics that fool the brain into releasing dopamine, oftentimes in much greater amounts than the body has ever experienced before, and it causes an addiction.
It's important to understand that everyone in the world has addictions, or rather natural addictions, to things that are good, like food, water, and sleep. These natural addictions are important for our health and survival, and without them, we would not hunger or create the things we need to survive. Now, we aren't exactly born with these natural addictions. Our body creates them. Let's look at an example. When you bite into an apple, your brain says, "Yum." Your brain recognizes that this apple is good for you. It has nutrition, vitamins, and gives your body the energy it needs to survive. Whenever the brain recognizes something as good, it releases a chemical called dopamine. Dopamine causes you to experience pleasure. It's what makes you feel good, like when biting into an apple. The brain releases this dopamine in order to teach the body that this is healthy, good for your survival, and that it should remember to do it again. Now, there are other things we do to release the pleasure of dopamine, like playing video games, exercising, or reading a good book. However, the amount of dopamine released during these activities is less than what's released when we eat food. The brain does this so it can recognize which is more important. So if you go 2 days without reading a book, or 2 days without eating food, your body is going to crave the food more than anything. As such, your brain creates what's called a memory of survival, which brings love body into the stasis of your survival. Now, there are some things that will never cause release of dopamine, like eating soap or brushing yourself in the face. The brain knows that these things are not good, and therefore is not releasing pleasurable dopamine because your brain does not want you to do it again. Now, let's look at alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, and other drugs. These are all classified placebos, or things cause cancer and other fatal diseases. Now, your brain should recognize that these things are harmful to your body. However, these substances have special chemical characteristics that fool the brain into releasing dopamine, oftentimes in much greater amounts than the body has ever experienced before. Because of this, the body is fooled into thinking that these things are good and important, sometimes even more important than food, water, or sleep, and consequently holds the number one spot in your survival hierarchy. So now, if you go 2 days without eating or 2 days without drinking alcohol, your body will actually crave the alcohol over the food. This is an extreme case of addiction, where the person addicted believes that they will die if they don't get it. The severity of the addiction depends on where the alcohol you're drawing actually relying on you to survive, and can increase even with casual use. Research shows that people under the age of 21 have the highest risk of having a survival hierarchy measure. Why? Because their brains are still young and developing, and are hypersensitive to false shocks and dopamine caused by these harmful substances. As a result, their brains are fully developed and mature, and a survival hierarchy becomes more permanent and less susceptible to pleasure. The flip side is that once you are 21, it becomes very difficult to remove these harmful substances from your survival hierarchy. Studies show that 9 in 10 people who currently struggle with addiction will start drinking, smoking, or music before the age of 21. Understanding addiction as a preventable disease can help save millions of lives. The decision to wait until 21 could mean the difference between a life enslaved by addiction or a life full of success and accomplishment. Want to learn more? Visit us at wait21.org.
Pros: the brain disease model of addiction has yielded effective preventive measures, treatment interventions, and public health policies to address substance use disorder. Neuroscience research in this area not only offers new opportunities for the prevention and treatment of substance addictions and related behavioral addictions, for example to food, sex, and gambling, but may also improve our understanding of the fundamental biological process involved in voluntary behavioral control.
To understand the complexities of addiction and its neurobiology, it's important to understand the brain's reward pathway. Information travels through the VTA area to the nucleus accumbens to the prefrontal cortex. These reward pathways make us feel pleasure and are activated by stimuli such as food, water, or sex. These same areas are also involved in addiction. Alcohol and drug use changes the way the brain works. You can see a normal functioning brain on the left and the abnormal functioning addicted brain on the right. Prolonged use of alcohol and drugs also changes the structure of the brain. You can see the normal healthy brain structure on the left and the abnormal addicted brain structure on the right, which could be long-lasting.
Cons. The concept of addiction as the disease of the brain challenges deeply ingrained values about self-determination and personal responsibility that frame drug use as a voluntary hedonistic act. In this view, addiction results from the repetition of voluntary behaviors. The concept of addiction as a brain disease has even more concerning implications for the public's attitudes and policy toward the addict. This concept of addictions appears to some to excuse personal irresponsibility and criminal acts instead of punishing harmful and often illegal behaviors.
We're going to look at how addiction is a physical presence in the brain. In order to do this, we must understand how the brain works. The brain has over 100 million neurons. And when we learn anything, or when we have any kind of thought, we grow pathways between neurons. And this creates patterns. So these neurological patterns become the thoughts themselves. So when we learn anything, when we have any thoughts, these patterns grow in the sense of they connect to more neurons. And the connections between the neurons become stronger and bigger. And just as a water pipe that's large will take more water, and a larger wire will take more electricity, so it is with the brain. To the point that if you have a thought enough times, it's very difficult to not have the thought. And we call this sort of subconscious thinking. So how do we apply this process to addiction? If we look at how addiction builds up over the years, it kind of starts off with normal thoughts. For example, I just want to look cool with my peers. So I'll have a smoke, or I'll have a drink, or I'll take a drug. I want to fit in. I want to party. Sometimes this turns into, I just want some peace. Sometimes it's, I'll get really drunk now and show them. And the thoughts just build up and build up. And they all end up with the one outcome, which is a use of a drug or a drink, or both. Quite often the thoughts turn from wanting to fit in or wanting to have a good time to thoughts of how bad I'm feeling and that I need to have a drink or a drug just to get the oblivion that I need. As you can see, the thoughts build up and it creates patterns of thinking in our brain that leads to the outcome of a use and a drink. And the more this happens, the easier the electricity goes down the wires, the more habitual it becomes, and the more difficult it is, and perhaps even it seems impossible, to not have that use or drink. As you can see, this is a very simplistic graphical representation of the thought patterns that make up addiction in the brain. Now this is just literally, 2-3 minutes of addictive thinking. If you imagine how many minutes of addictive thinking that you've gone through, or how many minutes, or even hours, or even days, or weeks, or months, or years, or even in some cases decades of this habitual thinking many times a day for years and years and years. Imagine what the tree in your brain looks like that leads to the outcome of having to have a drink or a use. Once you understand how big and deep your problem is, you then get a realization that just quitting is not going to do it. You're going to have to do a lot of work in diverting these thoughts to a different place. And this is going to take a long time, and you're probably going to need some help.
Issue apply in Ecuador. This model can be applied in Ecuador because in our country there is a lot of people with addictions that are not receiving the right treatment.
How did this happen? If you or a loved one is struggling with drug abuse, it can be easy to point fingers at the wrong places. Was I a bad parent? Am I too weak to resist temptation? We spend so much time trying to figure out the causes that we forget to acknowledge what addiction really is. Addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. In other words, addiction is a brain disease that causes compulsive drug use. But why does this definition matter? Because many people wrongly accuse addiction of being a choice. While drug abuse can obviously result from poor choices, it's much more than that. Drug addiction is a disease. It's important to acknowledge this because it's impossible to treat any illness unless we accurately diagnose it. In order to fix a problem, you have to know what it is. Let's take a short history lesson. Until the last few decades, society was even more prejudiced against drug addicts than it is today. It was normal to think that addicts lacked morality, discipline, or compassion. They were seen as folks out for their own pleasure without caring for anyone else, and this made it extremely difficult for those in need to seek treatment. Fortunately, today we know better. Here's how brain disease works. Addiction resides in the limbic system, a subconscious part of the brain involved with memory, emotion, and reward. The reward center is what ensures we survive. If you eat something delicious, for example, the chemicals in your brain trigger the reward center, increasing the likelihood that you'll eat the same thing again. Similarly, in addiction, the brain reprioritizes the drug, subconsciously telling the user that the drug is necessary for survival. Each time you take a drug, the chemicals distort the brain's communication system. This changes the way nerve cells normally send, receive, and process information. Over time, drug use activates nerve cells to send abnormal messages. The overstimulation of this reward system makes it harder and harder to quit, because the brain is teaching people to repeat the rewarding behavior of abusing drugs. It becomes a vicious cycle that's difficult to break, especially on your own. But it doesn't have to be that way. Fortunately, now that we know addiction is a brain disease, we have the tools necessary to stop it. Recovery from addiction is a journey that should emphasize addiction treatment for individuals with co-occurring mental health and substance use disorders. At Journey Pure, we integrate innovative therapies, wellness strategies, and technological tools to equip patients with a lifelong support system. It's time to regain control of your life. Visit journeypure.com today to learn more.
Application in medicine. Research guided by brain disease model of addiction had led development of more effective methods of prevention and treatment and more to inform public health and policies. For example, the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act of 2008, which required medical insurance plans to provide the same coverage from substance use disorders and other mental illness that is provided for other illness. Conclusion. Advances in neurobiology have begun to clarify the mechanisms underlying the profound disruption in decision-making ability and emotional balance displayed by persons with drug addiction. These advances also provide insight into the way in which fundamental biological processes, when disrupted, can alter voluntary behavior, control not just in drug addiction but also others related disorders of self-regulation such as obesity and pathogenic gambling and video gaming, the so-called behavioral addiction. Thank you.